Welcome to Dark Whispers Stories, a place of silence where mysterious stories blend with the sounds of nature. Outside, the rain is falling steadily, each drop gently tapping on the eaves like the gentle melodies of the night. Lie down comfortably, let the sound of the rain wash away all your worries, and let yourself fall into peace. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and feel each breath you take blend with the rhythm of the falling rain. Tonight, I will tell you a story slowly, gently, like the whisper of the wind through the window, like the dripping water outside, taking you into a deep dream. Let your mind get lost in this rain, let each word take you away from reality. Shall we begin? The rain is still falling, and we will go into the story now. ****.
Story 1. A knock at the door in the middle of the night. Since moving into a small house in the woods, the lives of young couple Emma and Ryan seemed to begin a new chapter full of promise. They fell in love, dreaming of a peaceful future in the middle of nature. But things started to change just a few weeks after they moved in. Every night, at around 3 a.m., there was a knock at the door. At first, the two thought it was a prank by someone in the area. "It's probably just an animal or the wind," Ryan said in a gentle tone to reassure Emma. But as the phenomenon continued, the knocks became more and more rhythmic. Emma couldn't sleep well. She felt that something was wrong. A creepy feeling crept into every corner of the house. One night, Ryan decided to be brave and opened the door right when the knock sounded. But strangely, there was no one outside. The pale moonlight illuminated the entrance, and the woods ahead were eerily quiet. "I must have imagined it," Ryan chuckled, but Emma saw the worry in his eyes. They set up a camera right in front of the door to find out what was going on. When they checked the first footage the next morning, they were stunned. In the footage, a figure stood motionless just inches away from the door. There was no clear face, just a blurry shape, but it was enough to make Emma cry with fear. "This can't be real," Ryan muttered as he watched the footage over and over again. Still, he couldn't deny that something, or someone, was playing tricks on them. The knocking continued in the following nights, and the mysterious figure continued to appear in the footage. Each time, it got a little closer. Emma and Ryan could no longer sleep peacefully. A sense of unease hung over the house like a thick fog. They decided to call the police. When the police arrived to check, they found no trace of anyone ever being there. "It could be some kind of cruel prank," the old cop said, but his eyes couldn't hide the confusion. Emma began to have nightmares. She would often dream that she was standing at the door, opening it, and what was outside was a blank black figure, pulling her into an endless dark space. Ryan, despite his efforts to remain calm, couldn't hide his growing anxiety. One night, the knocking became more intense. Instead of the familiar knock, it was a loud bang, as if someone was trying to break in. Ryan, with a kitchen knife in hand, quickly opened the door. But there was nothing else waiting for them except emptiness. Emma decided to look into the history of the house. She contacted the real estate agent and went to the local library. What she discovered turned her blood to ice. The house had once belonged to a young family, but they had disappeared without a trace 10 years ago. Locals rumored that on the night before they disappeared, they had also heard a strange knocking on the door. Could we be experiencing what they experienced? Emma asked Ryan, her voice trembling. Ryan didn't answer, but he knew that something terrible was happening. A week later, the knocking suddenly stopped. Emma and Ryan were relieved, thinking that the nightmare had ended. But when they checked the cameras the next morning, they found an image that almost drove them crazy. The figure was no longer standing at the door, but was now inside the house, staring straight into the camera with empty black eyes. "We have to leave now," Emma screamed. The two quickly packed their things and drove away into the night. They never returned to that house again. But what had happened still haunted them, like a never-ending nightmare. Those knocks at the door in the middle of the night, that shadowy figure, is it a warning or an entity searching for something that no one understands? If you ever hear a knock at the door in the middle of the night, think twice before opening it. because you never know what is on the other side. Story 2. The Uninhabited House. The Turner family has just moved into an old house deep in a small town in the American countryside. The house has a sad beauty with stained glass windows obscured by time and old wooden walls tinged with nostalgia. This is their dream, a chance to leave the hustle and bustle of the city and start a more peaceful life. But from the very first day, a cold feeling pervades the space, as if to warn them that this place does not completely belong to the world of the living. Strange things start happening just a few days after they move in. The lights in the house flicker automatically, strange noises come from the basement, and sometimes, the whole family feels an unusual chill even in the middle of summer. But everything really changes when the young daughter Emily accidentally discovers a horrifying secret while playing treasure hunting in the house. In a slightly damaged wall in the corner of the living room, Emily found a small opening. Curiously, she poked her hand in and pulled out an old, frayed piece of paper. It was a letter written in what looked like dried blood, the handwriting shaky but fierce. The contents of the letter chilled the family. It described in detail the brutal murders that had taken place in the 19th century. George, the father, decided to examine the wall more closely. Using a few simple tools, he carefully removed the rotten wooden paneling. They then discovered a secret alcove containing dozens of similar letters, all written in blood. Each letter was a confession from a man calling himself the Butcher, describing how he had murdered each victim and hidden their bodies in places where no one would find them. Emily's mother, Laura, began to search through old town documents to learn more about the house's history. What she discovered was even more horrifying. The house once belonged to a doctor named Jonathan Graves, who was considered a respected man in the community at the time. But rumors of strange disappearances of some of the townspeople always surrounded him. The police at that time never found evidence to charge Jonathan, and after his death, everything was forgotten. The more the Turner family read the letters, the more they realized that Jonathan was the butcher. But what made them shiver even more was the last letter. In it, he wrote that the souls of the victims would never rest until the truth was revealed, and they would always haunt anyone who dared to live in this house. From then on, the strange phenomena in the house increased. One night, George heard heavy footsteps on the second floor even though everyone in the house was asleep. When he went to check, he saw Emily's door slowly opening. Inside, the little girl stood motionless, her eyes staring blankly into space. Laura couldn't take it anymore. She contacted a paranormal researcher for help. He claimed that the house was haunted by unsettled spirits, and that the Turner family was in danger. They decided to leave the house immediately, leaving behind everything they had worked so hard to build in this place. But the scariest thing was that on the last night before leaving, George discovered a new letter on the dining table. The letter was written in fresh blood, and the content was only one sentence: "No one is allowed to leave without paying the price." The Turner family left the house in fear, carrying with them the terrifying memories that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The house returned to a deserted state, as if waiting for the next prey to dare to set foot in. And the secret of that serial killer remained buried in the darkness forever. What do you think about what happened to the Turner family? Will they be able to escape the house's curse? Don't forget to leave your comments and share this story with your friends who want to scare them. Story 3. The Locked Room. The Overland Hotel is an ancient building located in a small mountain town, where time seems to stand still. Once a luxurious symbol of a golden age, it is now just a deserted place, attracting curious visitors with its nostalgic beauty. But not everyone knows that, beneath its peaceful appearance, the Overland Hotel contains a dark secret, hidden in room number 616. That room is always locked. The staff never mention it, and if anyone asks, they just answer vaguely, that room is not used. Those who have worked here for a long time all understand that it is best to stay away from that room. But for curious guests, this prohibition is a stimulating invitation. One day, Samuel, a guest from far away, sets foot in the hotel. He was a young writer who specialized in mystery stories, and as soon as he heard the rumors about room 616, he was immediately drawn to it. Despite all the warnings, Samuel asked to stay in that room. The receptionist, an older woman with a worried look in her eyes, hesitated for a long time before handing him the key. "If you really want to, we can't stop you. But please be careful." Samuel just smiled, seeing it as part of the adventure. From the moment he entered room 616, Samuel felt something was different. The air in the room was heavy and cold, even though the heater was on. The dark walls seemed to absorb all the light, leaving the room in a dim darkness. But Samuel, with his curious nature, still reassured himself. The first night passed with strange noises. Sometimes it was the creaking of the floor, sometimes the sound of wind whistling through the cracks of the door. Samuel thought it was just the usual sounds of an old hotel. But on the second night, things began to change. As Samuel was writing, he felt a chill run down his spine. He raised his head and looked into the mirror opposite him. In the mirror, a dark shadow passed behind him, so fast that he was almost unsure if he had actually seen it. Samuel turned around, but the room was empty. He tried to ignore it, thinking that his imagination was playing tricks on him. But a few minutes later, he heard a whisper, very soft but clear, "Samuel." His heart pounded. Where did the voice come from? Samuel looked around, but saw no one. Still, he felt like something was watching him, waiting in the darkness. On the third night, things became more terrifying. Samuel woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was standing right next to his bed. When he opened his eyes, he saw a shadowy figure, shapeless, but with glowing red eyes staring at him. He jumped up, but the shadow disappeared immediately, as if it had never existed. Unable to bear it any longer, Samuel rushed out of the room, running straight down to the front desk. When he recounted what had happened, the old receptionist sighed. "I told you not to stay there," she said, her voice trembling. Room 616, there was a man who was brutally murdered many years ago. Since then, anyone who has stayed in that room has heard their name being called. They say his spirit is looking for someone to take his place. Samuel left the hotel the very next morning, never to return. But the strangest thing was, no matter how hard he tried to forget the horrifying experience, every night, as Samuel was about to fall asleep, he would hear a familiar voice in his head, whispering his name. Would you dare to stay in that mysterious room? If this story gives you goosebumps, share it with your friends to discover the dark secrets hidden in the Overland Hotel. Story 4. The Endless Forest. For best friends Alex, Maya, Brian and Chloe decided to organize a weekend camping trip to relax. The Black Hollow Forest, which is full of mysterious rumors, became the destination that Alex suggested. Although Maya and Brian were a bit apprehensive about the ghost stories surrounding this place, Alex still insisted that it was all just baseless rumors and convinced them. Chloe, although uncomfortable, did not want to ruin the plan. They arrived at the forest in the late afternoon. The group set up tents, lit a fire and sat together to chat. Alex, with his adventurous nature, recounted the strange stories he had heard about the forest. But as soon as he mentioned people who were lost forever, Chloe suddenly felt a chill down the back of her neck, as if someone was watching. The first night passed peacefully, but the next morning, they discovered something strange. The path leading back to town had disappeared. It seemed that the forest had changed overnight. The trees around them seemed larger and denser, and the sunlight could not penetrate them all. Maya suggested that the group try to find the old path, but no matter how long they walked, they always returned to the original campsite. The group began to feel anxious. As the sun set, the forest became eerily silent. The sounds of birds and insects disappeared completely, replaced by distant whispers, like voices talking from somewhere in the darkness. Just then, a man appeared. The man was wrapped in a long cloak, his face hidden by the darkness. His voice was hoarse and cold as he said, "You are lost, right? I can help you, but only if you do as I say." The group hesitated, but had no other choice. The stranger led them through the winding paths, telling them not to step out into the darkness. "The light is not your friend here," he warned. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. The stream they passed ran in reverse, and their shadows did not follow the light but wandered on their own. Chloe began to feel frightened, but she did not dare say anything. Finally, they came to a large clearing with a giant tree in the middle. The stranger turned, revealing his face for the first time, or rather, there was no face. What lay before them was a dark void. "This is the only way out," he said, his voice becoming more eerie, as if coming from deep within the forest. "But to get out, one of you must stay. The forest needs a new guardian." The group was horrified. "You're crazy. We won't let anyone stay here," Alex shouted. The stranger did not answer. Around them, the branches of the trees began to stretch out like arms. Chloe screamed as a pale face flashed in the darkness, then disappeared. The tree seemed to come alive, its branches moving as if to catch them. Alex suddenly stepped forward. "If I need someone, I'll stay." Maya and Chloe shouted in protest, but Alex looked at them with a determined gaze. "Go. Don't let this happen to anyone else." The stranger smiled and pointed to a small path behind the tree. "Go, before the forest changes its mind." Maya, Chloe, and Brian had no choice. They ran away, not daring to look back. When the sunlight hit their faces, they realized they were outside, but everything had changed. Time passed strangely. It had been 10 years since they entered the forest and the outside world. They never saw Alex again, but the forest did not let them go. In their dreams, they still heard Alex's voice, reminding them, the forest never forgets. Story 6. The Mysterious Neighbor. Stonewood Lane is a quiet place where neighbors greet each other every morning and know each house around. But house number 17 has always been a mystery. Its owner is Mr. Arthur Grant, an old man who lives alone. No one has ever seen him go out or talk to anyone in the neighborhood. Mr. Arthur's house looks old, with windows always covered by thick curtains. People say he has lived there for 3 decades, but no one knows anything about him. Occasionally, neighbors say they hear strange noises from inside, like whispering or tapping on the walls, but no one dares to go in to check. One day, Mr. Arthur fails to pay his rent on time. The landlord, Mrs. Margaret, decides to go in to check. At first, she just wants to knock on the door and ask what's going on. But after knocking on the door several times without getting an answer, her anxiety grew. "Is anyone in?" she called out, but there was still no response. After a few minutes, Margaret took out her spare key and opened the door. Inside the house, the air was heavy and cold. The musty smell hit her nose, forcing her to cover her face. The interior was simple but messy, with overturned chairs and a thick layer of dust covering every surface. But what made her shiver the most were the walls. All the walls in the house were covered with strange drawings. They were pale faces with empty eyes, mouths wide open as if screaming in pain. The drawings overlapped, creating a haunting space. Margaret entered the living room, where a large painting took up the entire main wall. It was the image of a house identical to number 17, but inside the windows, there were dark shadows standing tightly. On the wall at the end of the hallway, there was a large line written in scribbled letters, "Don't come back." Margaret felt a chill down her spine. Although she was curious, she did not dare to go further into the house. When she quickly walked to the door, she noticed a small table in the corner of the room. On it, there was an old photo of Mr. Arthur, standing next to a woman and 2 children. Margaret decided to call the police to check. When they arrived and investigated, Mr. Arthur's secrets were gradually revealed. It turned out that Mr. Arthur used to have a happy family living in this house. But a fire accident took the lives of his wife and 2 children 30 years ago. He survived but never left the house since then, living in extreme pain and obsession. The drawings on the wall were confirmed to be drawn by Mr. Arthur himself, as a way to deal with memories and loneliness. The police did not find him in the house, but a neighbor swore that the night before, they had seen a shadow behind the curtains, looking out. Margaret decided not to rent number 17 anymore. She told the story to the neighbors, and they all stayed away from the house. But there was one thing she did not tell anyone. When she left the house that day, she secretly took with her an old photo of Arthur and his family. That night, in her bedroom, she heard a knock on the window. When she looked out, she saw the shadowy figure of a man, standing there with empty eyes. From then on, no one dared to set foot in number 17 again. And every night, the light from the abandoned house remained dim, as if someone was living there, or waiting for a new guest to dare to enter. Story 7. Apartment on the 13th floor. Have you ever lived in a place where everything seems normal? But there is a floor, a part of the building that everyone avoids, that no one dares to talk about? And have you ever wondered, what really happens in the places that people try to erase, that no one wants to talk about? This story will make you think again about that. Let me tell you about an apartment, a building, and a dark secret that no one dares to face. I want you to imagine that you are standing right in an old apartment building, where everything seems normal, until you realize that there is a floor, the 13th floor, that is not on the map. And the only person, the newcomer, a girl named Emily, cannot resist that curiosity. Emily, a young girl, has just moved to the big city in search of new opportunities. She rented an apartment on the 12th floor of this old building, where the residents seem to live very quietly and avoid talking about the 13th floor. The 13th floor, that name kept ringing in her head, as if there was something terrible that no one wanted to talk about. From the moment she entered the apartment, she felt something strange in the air. It wasn't the usual silence, but a heavy feeling, as if there were eyes watching her every move. The residents in the building didn't talk about the 13th floor, they just shook their heads, or tried to change the subject when she asked. And that's when her curiosity arose. What really happened on that floor? One night, while cleaning the living room, a small noise made her stop. Emily looked around and saw a strange crack in the wall. She went closer and noticed a small door, carefully hidden behind an old wooden board. It was as if the door had been left untouched for decades. Emily couldn't help herself. She opened it. And what she saw changed her life. The door didn't lead to an old storage room or an attic. It opened onto a staircase that led upstairs, to a completely different space. There were no lights, just a cold, dark space. She felt a gravitational pull pulling her upwards, and though she was a little scared, her curiosity was stronger than ever. She walked up, step by step. With each step, the silence grew thicker, making her feel as if everything around her was watching her. When she reached the top of the stairs, she was faced with another door. This one wasn't like any other. It felt old, musty, as if no one had opened it in years. Without hesitation, Emily pushed the door open. And immediately, she stepped into a completely different world. It was not the 13th floor that she thought. This was a parallel world, where dim light and darkness intertwined. Strange creatures lurked in dark corners, and shrieks and gasps echoed from unseen places. Emily looked around, and she realized that she had entered a world filled with demons, lost souls, and monstrous creatures that no one could imagine. The door behind her had disappeared. There was no turning back. She was trapped in a world that she could not understand, and her life was being threatened every second. In this world, no one was her friend, everything wanted to destroy her. But Emily, with her courage and resilience, decided that she would not give up. With each passing minute, she realized more and more that these creatures were not random. They had been waiting for someone like her. Someone dares to open that door, dares to step into this threatening world. And now, she must face the challenges and traps they create to survive. Emily has no choice but to fight. Not only for her own life, but also for the deep secret of the 13th floor that she must uncover. These strange creatures do not exist by chance. They are part of an ancient curse, and Emily is the one chosen to break it if she can survive. Story 8. The Call from the Old Well. The first lesson Lily learned in life from her grandmother was never to go near the old well in the backyard. She said it was a dangerous place, a place that could swallow up anyone who dared to look. But that night, as a cold wind blew through the quiet garden, Lily heard the call again. A soft, ghostly sound, as if someone was calling for help from the bottom of the well. At first, she thought she had misheard, but the call rang out again, this time clearer, as if someone was calling her name. Lily. Lily. The voice was irresistible. Although she was filled with anxiety, her curiosity was stronger. She decided to step outside in the middle of the night, when no one in the house was paying attention. The old well was deep in the corner of the garden, an old stone well that her grandmother always said had been abandoned for centuries. But as Lily got closer, she realized that it was not just the old well, but something else hidden in that darkness. The smell of dampness, the smell of old earth, all mixed into the air as if this well had never been forgotten. She stood there, looking down at the bottom of the well. And when her eyes stopped at a dark spot below, she suddenly heard a loud noise. A cold arm suddenly reached up from the bottom of the well, grabbing the edge of the well. Lily screamed, panicked, but the arm did not let go, pulling hard and relentlessly. In the dim light of the night, she could not see the face clearly, only the eyes filled with hatred from the depths. Free me, free. The voice rang out from the darkness, as if coming from an imprisoned soul, a creature that had been buried underground for centuries. Lily could not believe her eyes. It was a creature, not human, but like one who had lived, imprisoned in the darkness for a long time. Free me, Lily. The voice called again, now not a plea but a threat. Lily knew that she was facing a terrible secret, a curse that had been buried for centuries. A feeling of dread took hold of her, but she could not turn back. Lily decided to go down the well, not out of curiosity, but because she felt that something truly terrible was waiting. She had to deal with this, before it was too late. And as she stepped down the well, everything changed. She was no longer in the garden. She was standing in a strange cave, where ghostly shapes and shadows loomed everywhere. Before she could even gather her wits, she felt a huge presence, as if the evil of thousands of years was surrounding her. A voice rang out, this time not from the other arm, but from this entire space. Finally, the time has come. The voice was sleazy, full of hatred. Free me from this prison, and I will show you power beyond your wildest imagination. Lily felt a chill run down her spine, realizing that she was facing an ancient being, who had ruled a dark empire before being imprisoned in this well. The curse had lasted too long, and now, she was the key to freeing this monster from its hold. But, a decision still lay before her. She could release it and plunge the world into eternal darkness, or she could close this door, leaving the creature buried beneath the ground forever. What do you think little Lily will do? Will she be able to face the temptation of boundless power, or will she choose to protect the safety of the world? Your choice will determine the end of this story. Leave your comments and share this story with others. Will they free the monster, or will they keep it in the dark forever? Story 9. The Old Radio. It all started one autumn afternoon, when the Anderson family happened to buy an old radio at a flea market. The radio looked old, the color had faded over the years, but it looked very special with its delicate carvings. Emily, David's wife, saw this radio immediately and could not resist the strange charm it brought. Although the price was not cheap, David agreed to buy it, because he felt something urging him to own this radio. When they got home, the Anderson family put the radio on the table in the living room. Emily curiously turned it on, but there was no radio signal, only a buzzing sound, as if it had been forgotten for a long time. A few minutes passed, and then, the radio suddenly emitted a small whisper, inaudible, but very strange. Don't come near. The voice was so small that it could only be heard in the silence of the night. David sat up, looking at Emily with a puzzled look. Did you hear anything? Emily was stunned, but she nodded. Is that someone talking? Her heart beat faster. She couldn't explain the vague feeling of fear rising within her. The radio wasn't an ordinary item. But they didn't pay much attention, because it was just a strange sound. Until one night, when everyone in the house had fallen asleep, the radio suddenly rang again. This time, it was clearer, and it wasn't a small voice anymore, but an urgent whisper, almost a scream. Die, in the dark. Tonight, there's no escape. The voice rang out steadily, as if warning someone. Emily woke up with a start, her heart pounding. She listened to the radio and didn't dare move. The voice continued, and this time, it was clearer than ever. Tonight, fate cannot be changed. Blood will be shed. Unable to bear it any longer, Emily decided to turn on the light and check the radio. When she picked it up, the sound stopped abruptly. She looked at it, feeling as if it was looking back at her. But then, there was nothing but eerie silence. The next morning, news of a death in the neighborhood spread like wildfire. A man, a neighbor of the Anderson family, had died in his own home, without any apparent cause. The police could not find any reasonable explanation. But Emily couldn't forget what the radio had whispered last night. She couldn't stop thinking about the strange coincidence between the death and the radio's warnings. And the next night, the radio sounded again. Someone's going to die tonight. No one can stop it. Emily and David begin to panic. They can't help but think that the radio isn't a worthless antique, but a mysterious tool that can predict death. They begin to record the voices and realize that every time the radio broadcasts, a death follows. And not just sudden deaths, the victims die inexplicably, as if an invisible hand is controlling their fate. When news of a woman's death in the neighborhood breaks, Emily begins to feel like she has to do something. The radio is reminding them of something terrible, but how can they stop it? It could be a prank, a simple coincidence, but why is it so accurate? One night, when the radio starts playing again, Emily decides not to let it go. She picked up the radio, the voice continued to ring coldly. Death is inevitable. Who's next? This time, Emily could no longer remain silent. She decided to find a way to destroy the radio, to end the evil it brought. But as she was about to smash it, a strange scene occurred. The radio automatically turned on, and a different voice, not the one she had heard before, spoke. You can't stop. We've been chosen. Lily looked at the radio, and suddenly realized something terrible. Not only were there the deaths the radio had predicted, but there was also some terrible power that had taken hold of her family. Now, she had to find a way to end this curse before it was too late. Can Emily and the Anderson family escape this radio? Will the curse continue to haunt them, or will the radio lead them to even worse things? Share this story with your friends and stay tuned for the next installments to discover the secret behind this ancient radio. The Devil's Doll. It all began one autumn afternoon when the Anderson family stumbled upon an old radio at a flea market. The radio was ancient, its color faded with age, but there was something oddly captivating about its intricate carvings. Emily, the wife, immediately saw it and couldn't resist its strange allure. Although it wasn't cheap, David, her husband, agreed to buy it. He, too, felt an inexplicable pull towards the radio. When they brought it home, the Andersons placed the radio on a table in the living room. Emily, curious, turned it on, but initially, there was no radio station, only static, as if it had been abandoned for many years. After a few minutes, the radio suddenly emitted a soft whisper, barely audible but undeniably eerie. Don't come near. The voice murmured, low and unsettling. David jerked up from his seat and looked at Emily with confusion. Did you hear that? Emily froze, her heart racing. Is someone speaking? For a moment, they both dismissed it as nothing more than an odd noise, but the next night, the whispers returned, clearer than before. This time, it was no longer a whisper but a chilling warning. Death, in the darkness. Tonight, it cannot be avoided. Emily sat bolt upright in bed, her pulse racing. She listened closely to the radio, And again, the voice spoke, this time more urgent. Tonight, fate cannot be changed. Blood will spill. The following morning, they heard news about the sudden death of a neighbor. The cause was mysterious, with no clear explanation, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the voice from the radio had predicted it. And each night, when the radio whispered its grim predictions, they seemed to come true. The next evening, the radio spoke again. Tonight, someone will die. No one can stop it. Emily and David became increasingly terrified. No matter how much they tried to get rid of the radio, it always found its way back. Every night, the voice whispered ominous warnings, and every day, a death would occur in the neighborhood. Desperate, Emily sought answers in the old library, where she uncovered the chilling history of the radio. It wasn't an ordinary piece of furniture, it was a cursed object, forged in ancient rituals, used to predict death. The radio was bound to the spirits of the dead, their souls trapped, compelled to speak of their demise. As the deaths continued, Emily and David realized they had to stop the curse. But every time they tried to throw the radio away, it would return, sitting silently in the living room, waiting for its next prediction. One night, Emily, unable to bear the terror anymore, decided to confront the radio. She placed it in the center of the room and began chanting the incantations she had read about in the ancient books. The air grew thick, the wind howled, and the darkness seemed to close in around her. Suddenly, a horrific scream echoed from the radio. Emily dropped it to the ground, stepping back, but she couldn't turn away. Her family stood frozen as the radio cracked open, revealing a dark, monstrous figure emerging from within. The room shook violently as the shadowy figure engulfed everything in its path. Will Emily and her family be able to break the curse of the Devil's Doll, or will they become its next victims in an endless cycle of horror? Stay tuned for more twists in this chilling tale. Would you dare to explore the secrets of the doll? Share this story and join your friends in uncovering the terrifying truths that remain hidden. The figure at the end of the road. Every night, when the darkness fell, Ethan and Lily, a young couple, felt the peacefulness of their neighborhood enveloping them. The road near their house was always quiet and deserted, with nothing special to note except the small houses lined up next to each other, their faint lights flickering through the windows. It was a calm and serene place. But one night, everything changed. It was a rainy evening, with raindrops softly falling on the empty road. Ethan and Lily were walking home after a long evening out. As they neared the end of the street, Lily suddenly noticed a figure standing motionless at the very end of the road. The figure was still, unshifting, and the dim light from the street lamps barely illuminated its shape. Ethan paused and looked at the figure. "Look, Ethan, there's someone standing at the end of the road," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan turned his head to look, then nodded. It could be someone homeless, or just someone lost. But what was strange was that the figure didn't move. Even though Ethan and Lily stood some distance away, the figure remained still, as though it had not noticed them. They decided to approach it, but as they walked closer, the figure suddenly vanished. No trace, no sound. The entire street became unnervingly silent, as if the figure had never been there. "Did you see that?" It disappeared," Lily said, her voice quivering. Ethan glanced around but saw nothing but the darkness. "I don't know, but we're probably just overthinking it. It might have been an illusion." Despite his words, both of them felt an unsettling feeling that lingered in their minds. They hurried home, but the unease didn't leave them. The next day, the strange occurrence repeated itself. Every night, as they walked down the street, the figure appeared again, motionless at the end of the road, facing them. Sometimes it happened when they were returning from the park, sometimes when they had just left the house. Each time they approached, the figure disappeared just before their eyes, as though it had never been there at all. Lily grew more and more anxious. "Ethan, I don't get it. This isn't normal." Ethan, too, began to feel a strange fear building up inside him, but he didn't want to alarm Lily. "Maybe it's just someone playing a prank. We shouldn't worry too much." But things didn't stop there. One night, as they ventured outside, Ethan and Lily decided to find out what was going on. They walked toward the figure, but this time, when they got close, the figure didn't vanish. It just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for them. Ethan felt an icy chill run down his spine. "Do you feel that, Lily?" "Something's wrong." Lily could only nod, unable to speak. She stared at the figure, her mind screaming that something wasn't right. And then, as they drew closer, something unimaginable happened. The figure turned toward them, and its eyes locked with theirs. Eyes empty and hollow, not human. Ethan and Lily stood frozen, unable to move. A voice echoed in their heads, not spoken out loud, but an overwhelming thought. "Don't come closer. Turn back." Before they could react, the figure suddenly lunged at them with terrifying speed, as if being pulled by an invisible force. Ethan and Lily ran as fast as they could, but whenever they glanced back, the figure remained there, watching them, unmoving. They ran home, too scared to look back again. From that night on, the road was no longer a peaceful place, it was a haunting, filled with a sense of dread. Ethan and Lily knew that something inexplicable, something sinister, waited for them at the end of the road every time darkness fell. Will Ethan and Lily ever uncover the truth behind the figure at the end of the road, or will they be haunted forever by an unsolvable mystery? Do you dare face what lies in the dark? Share this story and join your friends in uncovering the terrifying secrets that await. Story 12. Ghost Ship at Sea. Imagine a dark night, when the waves are crashing against the shore and everything around is just pitch black. A group of young, adventurous people are sailing on a small boat, in the middle of the vast ocean, not knowing that they are about to face a terrible secret that no one can imagine. It is a moonless night, when Alex, Jake, Sarah, and Lily, a group of close friends, are sailing to explore the less traveled seas. They have heard stories about these mysterious seas, where huge waves can make ships disappear in the blink of an eye. But for them, those are just old stories, unable to stop their passion for adventure. As they set sail, the cool and quiet air of the ocean envelopes them. Everything seems peaceful, as if there is nothing to fear, until night falls. A strange noise echoed in the distance, like the sound of metal rubbing against metal. Sarah was the first to hear it and pointed into the distance. "Did you hear that? There's something floating on the water." Alex looked in the direction Sarah was pointing, and his eyes widened as he saw a huge black shape looming over the water. It was a ship, an old ship, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. There were no lights, no signs of life, just a ghost ship floating in the dark sea. "Let's go," Alex said, his voice filled with excitement and a little worry. "We have to go up there, there must be an interesting story behind this ship." The group rowed closer to the ship. As they got closer, a strange feeling began to creep over them. There was no sound, only silence, and the ship seemed to be waiting for them. As they stepped onto the ship, a chill ran down their spines, as if a cold wind had swept through from somewhere. The ship was deserted. The doors were closed, the walls were covered in moss, and the traces of time were etched into every corner. The strange thing was that, although the ship looked abandoned for many years, there was no sign of decay or disrepair. Everything was as intact as if it had just stopped. "We should go back," Sarah said, but her voice was a little worried. Jake, ever the adventurous one, seemed excited. "No, this is our chance to explore." But as they entered the ship, an eerie silence fell upon them. Not a sound. Not a sign of anything but the terrible cold that made it impossible for them to leave. A dim light shone from the back of the ship. They followed it and discovered a large room, where there was an old dining table with no chairs. Suddenly, a soft screech sounded from the corner of the room, startling the group. "Someone's definitely playing a prank on us," Jake said, but he was starting to feel nervous. Lily stopped laughing. "I don't think this is a prank." The group began to move deeper into the ship, and they discovered strange drawings on the walls, symbols that couldn't be explained. The symbols seemed to be related to something very ancient, very dark. A whisper sounded from somewhere, a hoarse but powerful voice. "You can't get out." The group froze, eyes wide with fear. A shadowy figure appeared in the corner of the ship, slowly moving toward them. Ghosts from the past were awakening, souls imprisoned on this ship for centuries. And then, suddenly, the ship's doors slammed shut, as if some invisible force had prevented them from leaving. The light faded, and darkness enveloped the ship. The group began to feel the presence of spirits, ghosts from centuries past, people who had died in terrible circumstances on the ship. "We have to get out of here," Alex shouted, but when they tried to escape, all the exits seemed to be blocked. The ship refused to let them go. A voice rang out from the darkness, cold and full of resentment. "You have come, and you will not leave." The group began to run, not daring to look back, but no matter how far they ran, the ship did not let go. Every time they turned back, the ghosts appeared before them, pale faces, eyes devoid of souls, only hatred. It was a run with no way out. Can the group escape this ghost ship, or will they become souls forever imprisoned in its darkness? Stay tuned to discover the terrifying secret behind the ghost ship at sea. Share this story and discover the unexplainable secrets with your friends. Story 13. The Dead Man's Ring. It all began one autumn morning when Clara, a single woman, was browsing at a flea market. Clara loved antiques, things with a bit of history, a bit of mystery. As she walked through the small stalls, her eyes fell on an ancient ring hanging on a cloth pillow. It looked old, with a bright gemstone in the center, but something about the ring made her feel drawn to it. The salesman, an old man with wrinkled skin and strange eyes, smiled and handed the ring to Clara. "This is a very precious antique, young lady. This gift is not only beautiful, but also contains a power, a secret." Clara felt a chill run down her spine at the old man's words, but she quickly shook it off and tried the ring on her hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made especially for her. The shopkeeper winked, as if she knew she would buy this ring. "You'll definitely like it," the saleswoman said hoarsely, but Clara just smiled and paid for the item she had just chosen. From that day on, Clara began to wear the ring every day. However, she did not expect that the ring would bring her an unimaginable nightmare. That night, after wearing the ring for the first time, Clara went to bed and fell asleep. But her sleep was not as peaceful as the other nights. In her dream, she found herself lying on the bed, and a figure suddenly appeared beside her. It was a man, his face pale, his eyes wide open, staring straight at her with an indescribable expression. He stood there, right next to the bed, not saying a word, just silently as if waiting for something. Clara screamed in her dream, but could not move. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, as if she was facing death. But when she opened her eyes, the man disappeared immediately, leaving only a silent space. The next morning, Clara woke up, her heart pounding, but she thought it was just a strange dream. However, when she looked down at her hand, the ring was still there, on her finger, and the cold feeling from it was a reminder. Last night was not a normal dream. The next day, the incident happened again. Clara wore the ring to work and returned home late. She went to bed, intending to rest after a long day, but when she closed her eyes, the man appeared in her dream again. This time, he stepped closer, his eyes filled with resentment and pain. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, only cold breath and a terrifying silence. "Who are you?" Clara wanted to ask, but her mouth could not utter a word. The man slowly reached out to her, his hands cold, as if he wanted to touch her, but before he could do anything, Clara woke up, covered in sweat. She couldn't continue living in these dreams. Clara decided to take off the ring and put it away, but strangely, the ring refused to leave her hand. Every time she tried to take it off, a sharp pain spread from her finger to her entire body, as if the ring was clinging to her. It seemed that the ring had become an inseparable part of her, a mysterious connection that she couldn't explain. Clara tried to look up the ring and discovered a horrifying story. The ring belonged to a man named Victor, who died in a boating accident many years ago. It was said that the ring was a protective charm, but it also had the ability to trap the souls of the dead, and Victor had never left his ring. His spirit clings to the ring, and whoever wears it will be haunted by his ghost. Clara realized that, whether she took off the ring or not, Victor's ghost would still haunt her, never letting go. This terrifying truth made it impossible for Clara to live in peace, and she began to search for a way to free herself from the ring. One night, when Clara could not bear it any longer, she decided to find a resting place for Victor's spirit. She went to the cemetery where Victor was buried and put on the ring for the last time, placing it on his grave. As she did so, a cold feeling enveloped her body, and in that moment, Clara felt a gentle breath on her neck. Finally, "You let me go," a deep voice rang out, and Clara felt the serenity in the air. When she turned around, the ring was gone, and Victor's ghost no longer appeared in her dreams. Victor's spirit has been released, but will the ring really stop haunting Clara? Or will someone else find the ring and face what she went through? This story is not over yet, and mysteries still await. Do you dare to wear the dead man's ring? Share this story and join your friends to learn more about the ring's dark secrets. Story 14. The Mysterious Lighthouse. In a remote area of the sea, where the waves crash against steep cliffs and the sea wind howls all night long, there is an ancient lighthouse that has been abandoned for decades. This lighthouse used to be a symbol of life and safety for ships passing through the dangerous sea. But then, one day, it was left alone, with no one to care for and operate it anymore. And one night, something strange happened. Every night, when the night falls, the lighthouse begins to glow, a strong light shining from the broken glass windows, as if it were still operating, even though no one is there. The waves seem to crash against the shore more strongly, and no one dares to go near this place, because everyone knows that the lighthouse has been abandoned for a long time. However, a group of investigators decided to get closer to discover the truth behind this strange phenomenon. They were experts in the field of paranormal investigations, and the story of this lighthouse had long fascinated them. The group consisted of John, Sarah, Mark, and Elena, who did not believe in ghost stories, but they knew that this lighthouse contained something inexplicable. As they approached the island, the sky was covered with dark clouds and the sea wind was blowing. The lighthouse stood tall in the night, the dim light from its lamp still shining, illuminating the surrounding sea. There was no sign of anyone there, but the light still did not go out. "We have to go inside and see," John said, his voice determined. The group climbed the rotten steps of the lighthouse, and as they approached the door, they felt a cold draft of air coming from inside. The door opened easily, and they stepped inside, only to see an unbelievable sight. The lighthouse looked as if it had been abandoned for a long time, but inside there were signs that someone had lived there. The beds were old and broken, but there was a table full of books and maps, as if the keepers were still active. However, there was no one in sight, only small, faint footprints on the damp ground. As they continued deeper inside, a strange feeling came over them. A feeling that someone was watching their every move. They climbed the long steps that led to the tower, where the light from the lighthouse was shining. But as they got closer, strange noises began to sound, whispers, doors creaking as if someone was moving in the darkness. "Something is definitely wrong," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. Mark shook his head. "We've come this far, we can't stop halfway." When they reached the top of the lighthouse, the powerful light from the lamp illuminated the night sea. But when they looked inside, they couldn't believe their eyes. The photos, the records from the previous period, all spoke of a group of lighthouse keepers, but these people had all mysteriously disappeared. No one knew why. The last pages of the records were a series of jumbled lines, as if the keepers had gone mad from the loneliness and the mysterious calls from the sea. Lena found an old diary, in which there was a record of an investigation that the keepers had conducted before disappearing. Following it, they discovered a horrifying secret. This lighthouse was not just an ordinary construction, but part of an ancient ritual, where souls were trapped in the sea, forced to guard the endless sea. The last words in the diary read, "We can't get out. They're coming." At that moment, the lighthouse suddenly went out, and the room became dark. A terrible noise rang out from the bottom of the sea, and darkness suddenly enveloped the group. Suddenly, they saw blurry figures, ghosts from the past appearing before their eyes, moving around them. "Run!" John shouted. The group turned around, rushing down the stairs, but they clearly felt that they could not escape. The ghosts from the previous era, the lighthouse keepers, had returned and they could not leave. As the group of investigators tried to run outside, a screech rang out from the darkness, as if a curse had been lifted. Can the investigation group escape the haunting of the mysterious lighthouse, or will they become souls trapped there like the previous keepers? The dark secrets of this lighthouse have never been fully revealed. Do you dare to find out the truth behind this mysterious lighthouse? Share this story and discover the unseen things with your friends. Story 15. The Ghost Train. In a remote suburb where the old train tracks are forgotten, there is a deserted train station that no one dares to approach. This train station has been abandoned for decades, when the last trains left, taking with them the people who once lived in the area. The houses around the station are now just moldy concrete blocks, broken windows, and no sign of life. But every night, something strange happens. At midnight, an old, rusty, driverless train appears at the abandoned train station. The train does not stop, but runs as if controlled by an invisible force. The train cars are covered in dust, and the dim light from the train's lamps shines through the night, creating a ghostly scene. And every time the train stops, a few people will get on the train, but none of them ever return. The story of this ghost train has been rumored for generations, but no one dared to investigate, because everyone knew that those who boarded the train would be lost forever. Only one man named Eric, a paranormal investigator, was brave enough to find out the truth behind this ghost train. Eric had heard strange stories about the driverless train since he was a child, and now, as an expert in this field, he decided to go to the train station one night to explore for himself. He wanted to find out if the train was a supernatural phenomenon, or just a prank. When Eric arrived at the station that night, he immediately felt a cold and heavy atmosphere. Cold winds blew, and the space was eerily quiet. The train had not arrived yet, but he could feel that something very strange was waiting for him. He stood alone under the moonlight, the shadows of the trees bending in the wind, and looked at the rusty train tracks. It was exactly midnight when he heard the rumbling of the wheels on the tracks. The old train, covered in dust, slowly started to move towards the station. He saw rusty carriages, broken windows, but the light from the train lamps was still dim as if this train was resurrected from the past. The train stopped in front of Eric. He looked into the carriages, but saw no one. However, there was a strange feeling that there were figures, souls watching him. Despite the strong sense of unease, Eric still decided to board the train. As he entered the first carriage, a cold breeze blew past him, and the light from the train lamps illuminated strange faces, without any signs of life. In this train car, there were only old cloth seats, broken windows, and a silence as if it had been abandoned for a long time. He felt the silence, but there was something inexplicable waiting for him. He continued to walk into the following cars. Each one was the same, no one, only silent ghosts, faint images flashing before his eyes. With each step he took, Eric felt more and more like he was surrounded by an invisible force, something terrifying waiting for him. When he entered the last car, everything suddenly changed. A figure appeared in the corner of the train, staring at him. It was a man, his face gaunt, his eyes white, looking at Eric as if he was waiting for an explanation. But the man said nothing, just stood still, his eyes empty, full of resentment. "How many people are you?" The man spoke suddenly, his voice deep and menacing. Eric couldn't answer, only feeling a cold wind blow past him. He looked around, and suddenly realized that there was not just one person, but hundreds, thousands of souls trapped on this train, people who had boarded but never returned. "We can't leave," the man said. "And neither can you." Eric felt his heart clench, his body began to tremble. He realized that this ghost train was not an ordinary train. It was a place where the souls of the dead were held, and there was only one way to escape. The next person to board would become part of this eternal guard. Eric turned around, rushing out of the train. But as he tried to leave, the train doors slammed shut, and the train began to move. He couldn't get out. The spirits on the train begin to surround him, and he feels the cold, the darkness will envelop him. Will Eric be able to escape this ghost train, or will he be trapped forever, becoming a part of those spirits? This story is not over, and the secrets are still to be revealed. Do you dare to step on the ghost train? Share this story and find out the truth behind this mysterious train with your friends. Story 16. The Devil in the Mirror. David is a lonely man, living in an old house on the outskirts of the city. He has always loved antiques, especially antique mirrors that he believes contain mysterious stories and histories. One day, on a trip to the flea market, he discovers an old, dusty, strangely shaped mirror. It has an intricately carved wooden frame, with classic lines that cannot be found in modern mirrors. The shop owner, a strange-looking man, looks at David with sharp eyes. This mirror is no ordinary object, my friend. It has power. It can show you things you don't always want to see. David, despite feeling a strange feeling rising in his heart, still cannot resist the attraction of the mirror. He bought it and brought it home, where the mirror was placed in the living room, opposite an old armchair. That evening, as David sat down in his favorite chair and began reading, the dim light from the table lamp fell on the mirror. Everything was normal until he looked into the mirror and noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror did not match what he was doing. When David lifted his hand to adjust the page of the book, the image in the mirror remained the same. His hand in the mirror did not move at all. Feeling confused, he continued to move around the room, but the reflection in the mirror remained still, not following his actions. A cold feeling spread throughout his body, but David still could not take his eyes off the mirror. The next day, he decided to check the mirror again, wondering if he had seen it wrongly. But when he stood in front of the mirror, he noticed that the strangeness was not just that the reflection was not correct, but that the image in the mirror had a separate life. The mirror reflected an image of him, but it was not the real him. In the mirror, he saw a blurry figure. Its eyes were dark, and it began to move independently, as if it was doing actions that he did not perform. That night, when the light from the desk lamp shone on the mirror, David saw the image in the mirror raise its eyes. The face reflected was smiling strangely. But he did not move, did not smile. The feeling of fear made him unable to sit still. The image in the mirror began to change, from a gentle appearance to a dark figure, full of scars and wounds. It began to reach out from the mirror, and as it did so, David felt a coldness rise from behind him, as if something was touching him. David turned to look, but there was nothing behind him. Panic set in, but when he looked in the mirror again, the image in the mirror began to move like him, but with strange movements, as if it were waiting for something. Over the next few days, the strange events increased. Every time David looked in the mirror, the image in the mirror began to act differently. It began to reflect actions that he could not perform, movements that he could not explain. It laughed when he was sad, it cried when he felt nothing. The feeling grew stronger that the mirror was not just reflecting an image, but something dark, some spirit or force was trapped in it. One night, when David woke up in the middle of the night, he felt a strange presence in the room. He turned to look and saw the mirror glowing, not with normal light, but with a dark, dim light. In the mirror, he saw the image of a man, not himself, but with a face that looked exactly like his. The man in the mirror stared at him with empty eyes, full of hatred and resentment. It began to move, as if it was slowly walking away from the mirror. David couldn't take his eyes off the image. The coldness enveloped his body again. "Leave me," he shouted, but the image in the mirror did not stop. Its eyes glowed, and a voice rang out in his head, a voice that was not his. Finally, "I'm out." Instantly, the image in the mirror rushed out of the glass, and David felt an invisible force pulling him into it. He tried to escape, but the mirror had become an inescapable trap. Can David escape this haunted mirror, or will he become part of the world of souls trapped in mirrors forever? Do you dare to face that mirror? Share this story and discover the mystery behind this antique mirror with your friends. Story 17. The Unnamed Road. For a long time, the people living in this peaceful little town did not pay attention to the old map that the city kept from the old days. This road, without a name, without any signs or directions in reality, but clearly appeared on the old map that people still occasionally looked up to study. The people in the area never knew about this road. They only heard through word-of-mouth stories that there were curious people who tried to find it, but none of them returned. Nothing would have changed if it weren't for a group of young people, Ethan, Lisa, James, and Clara. One evening when they were gathering at the old coffee shop in town, Ethan saw the old map opened in front of him. While chatting, he accidentally noticed a strange road, whose name he had never heard before. The map indicated that the path extended from the woods near town, but when he asked the locals, they all said that no one knew where it was, and that no one had ever found it. The group's curiosity was piqued, and the decision was made: they would search for this unnamed path. There was only one problem: no one knew where to start. "Let's just follow the map and see," Ethan said, his eyes shining with determination. Lisa, though a little nervous, couldn't resist the lure of adventure. "There must be a reason why this path hasn't been found," she said. "But we'll find out." James, with his usual recklessness, agreed immediately. "Why not? We have nothing to lose, anyway." Clara, despite a bad feeling in her heart, agreed to join. The group arranged their schedule and planned their trip the next morning. When the group reached the dense forest where the map pointed, they began to realize that the atmosphere here was different from other places. The ancient trees were dense, the weak light shining through the foliage, making the space seem to be covered in darkness even during the day. They continued to follow the traces on the map, although the path was full of crisscrossing branches and tall bushes. After a few hours of walking, they suddenly discovered a strange trail, not on the map. It was an unnamed path, but it was right in front of them, spacious and airy. There was no reason to stop, so they decided to continue. Along the path, they did not encounter any signs of humans. There were no houses, no traces of life. There was only a long path, winding through the dense forests and a strange atmosphere. As they went deeper, the sky darkened rapidly, as if it were already night even though it was only afternoon. Strangely, the sounds around them began to change. The birdsong stopped, replaced by small whispers, as if someone was watching them. Lisa stopped, looking around. "Did you hear that? Something's not right." At that moment, Clara turned around and noticed a large door, located between two tall, ancient trees. The door seemed not to be part of this world. It had no lock, but strange symbols carved into the wood. Ethan stepped closer and placed his hand on the door. Immediately, the door opened smoothly, even though there was no one on the other side. The group looked at each other, a little worried but also curious, and then they stepped through the door into a completely different space. They entered a strange land, where the sky was blood red, and dark clouds hung in the air. Strange, inhuman creatures walked the streets, their eyes glowing like lamps. The buildings around them were structured like drawings in ancient books, and strange signs were carved on the walls. "Where are we?" James whispered, his voice filled with panic. Suddenly, a creature appeared from behind them. It was shaped like a human, but its skin glistened like metal, and its eyes were completely white. "Welcome to a world that does not belong to you," it said, its voice as cold as the night wind. The group was stunned. They realized that they had not only entered another world, but one they could not understand, where the laws of time and space had been changed. A place where these creatures not only live, but also control everything. The story of the nameless road has come true, and now, they have to face unimaginable challenges. This road is not a road leading to a peaceful place, but a gate leading to a world that does not belong to humans. A world full of things that they cannot explain. Can the group escape this world, or will they be trapped forever in a strange universe that does not belong to the human world? The mysteries still await. Do you dare to step into that nameless road? Share this story and discover the truth behind this mysterious road with your friends. Story 18. Whispering from the Woods. The Harper family has just moved into a small house on the edge of an ancient forest. The locals have always told strange stories about this forest, where the ancient trees seem to have their own wisdom, and many people have gone missing in it. But for Emma and Jake Harper and their two children, Lily and Ben, this forest is simply a part of nature, a quiet, ideal place to start a new life. On the first day in the house, everything is perfect. The space is fresh, the air is fresh, and they easily adapt to their new life. However, from the very first night, strange things begin to happen. As the family is getting ready for bed, a soft whispering sound comes from outside the window. It is unlike any sound they have heard before. At first, Emma thought it was just the wind, but then, as she listened closely, she realized that the whisper was more like a voice, vague and seductive, as if someone were calling her name. Emma. Emma. She couldn't identify the voice, but it gave her a strange feeling, both frightening and enchanting. She turned to look at Jake, who was lying next to her, but he didn't seem to have heard anything. Something's wrong, Emma whispered, but Jake only shrugged. Why are you so worried? It's probably just some animal. But Emma couldn't shake the unease that was rising inside her. She kept hearing the whisper all night, and this time, it wasn't just her name. Each time it sounded, the voice was clearer, as if someone was standing right outside the window, looking straight into her room. The next day, the family decided to take a walk in the woods to get a better understanding of the area. As they entered the woods, everything seemed normal. But as they went deeper, the air became thicker, and the whispering came from the darkness, strange and creepy. We have to get out of here, Emma said, but her eyes were drawn to a dim path that led deeper into the woods. The trees, the shadows, everything seemed to be surrounded, and no one could tell where the exit was. Lily and Ben, even though they were young, began to feel nervous. They clung to their mother, but neither could stop. The whispering grew clearer, as if an invisible force was pulling them deeper into the woods. The voice was like a call, enchanting and terrifying. Ben. Lily. Do you want to see the other side? Lily heard it, and she turned to look at her mother, her eyes wide with fear. Mom, can you hear me? Emma felt her heart tighten. We have to go back now. As the family hurried back, they realized that the path they had taken was no longer there. Everything seemed to have changed. The ancient trees grew thicker, and the dark shadows seemed to envelop them. The whispering grew stronger, as if an invisible force was controlling their every move. Run! Emma shouted, pulling her children's hands, but they seemed unable to run. Their feet felt glued to the ground, each step becoming more difficult. Suddenly, from the darkness, a figure appeared. It was a woman, long in black hair, her eyes vacant, as if she were not human. Welcome to my forest, her voice rang out, filled with darkness. These souls belong to me. Emma could not breathe. A chill ran down her spine. The family tried to run, but every time they turned around, the figure appeared before them, blocking all exits. As night fell, Emma realized that they had wandered into a world that did not belong to them. The whispers continued to echo, as if the woods were alive, calling them deeper. Lost souls in the ancient woods, strange creatures were lurking around them, and there was only one way out, to face this darkness. Can the Harper family escape this strange forest, or will they be dragged into the darkness forever? What path will take them out, or will they become part of the lost souls in the woods? Do you dare to enter the woods and discover the secrets hidden within? Share this story and join your friends in facing the whispers from the darkness. Story 19. The Last Bus. Daniel's journey began on a cold winter evening, when he hurried out of the office after a long day of working late. The heavy rain made everything blurry, and the street lights sparkled in the puddles like streaks of light. He looked up at the gray sky, suddenly realizing that he had missed the last bus home. Feeling tired and not wanting to wait any longer, Daniel decided to take the latest bus of the night. He knew that this was not a regular bus, but one that only a few people took. An old bus, with a faded body, ran through each deserted street. When the last bus of the night stopped, Daniel got on and saw that there were only a few people on it. Although it was quite late, he still felt a bit peaceful, as if it was just him and a few strangers. They all sat silently, no one spoke, no one moved. Their faces were staring out the window, seemingly oblivious to Daniel's presence. Daniel chose a seat near the window, looking out, feeling the cold wind and rain playing through the glass. The ride slowly passed through the empty streets, the dim streetlights reflecting in the puddles. Suddenly, a strange feeling began to rise in his heart. Why were the other passengers so quiet? They didn't look at each other, no one moved. Everyone seemed to be trapped in their own thoughts, but something was wrong. Their faces were expressionless, and their eyes, lifeless. Their eyes were like dark holes, as if they weren't human. A sudden screech of brakes interrupted Daniel's train of thought, startling him. The car stopped, and a woman got out. She seemed quite familiar, but Daniel couldn't remember where he had seen her. She looked around, her eyes flashing as if searching for someone, then stopped at the seat opposite Daniel. "Where's this bus going?" Daniel asked, trying to break the oppressive silence. The woman turned around, her eyes shining strangely. "Home," she replied, her voice sounding as if it were coming from far away. The uneasiness in Daniel's heart became even more pronounced. He looked around, noticing that the passengers on the bus were not living people. There was only silence and empty eyes staring at him. Each passenger, one by one, had strange signs: a man with silver hair and a pale face, a girl with bloodshot eyes, and an old man sitting silently, as if waiting for something. As the bus continued to roll, a strange scene appeared. A man stood up, but instead of going to the front door like everyone else, he walked backwards, looking back, as if he wanted to leave the car, but couldn't get out. Suddenly, he stopped and looked at Daniel, his eyes blank, then disappeared into the darkness inside the car. A cold feeling ran down Daniel's spine. Where is this? He wondered. The other passengers didn't react, they remained in that state, as if they didn't belong to this world. At this moment, a voice came from the woman opposite. "You're here, Daniel." He was startled when he heard his name, but he couldn't remember when he had seen her. I don't understand. I'm not one of you." The woman didn't respond, just smiled strangely, but her smile was not friendly at all. The others began to turn towards him, their eyes no longer those of the living, but of spirits, shadows trapped in a world with no way out. Daniel felt a dark presence envelop him. The passengers were not living, they were ghosts, souls who could not find a way out. And this bus, was their last bus, taking them to a place forever, a place from which he could not return. He hurried to stand, but when he tried to leave the bus, the door slammed shut, unable to open. Everything around him began to change, the bus no longer running on familiar streets, but gliding through blurry streets, as if time and space had stopped. "This bus never stops," a voice said in the darkness. "You're on, and you can't get off." Will Daniel be able to escape the last bus, or will he become one of the ghosts of that bus? The story is not over, and his journey continues. Do you dare step on this bus? Share this story and discover the secrets that have not been revealed with your friends. Story 20. The Cemetery Keeper. Michael had always loved his job. As a cemetery keeper, he felt a strange serenity working among the graves, where it was quiet and peaceful. The cemetery he worked at was on the outskirts of town, where the trees grew thick and the shadows of the old graves created a mysterious atmosphere. He had worked there for 3 years, and although the job seemed simple, sweeping, tending the trees, and maintaining the cemetery, something strange happened that would change his life forever. One day, as the sun was setting and the shadows of each grave were long, Michael was walking along the paths of the cemetery, checking to see if anyone had visited. He passed by old headstones, stones worn by time, and his eyes stopped on a new headstone placed near the back of the cemetery. On the tombstone was the name of a man named Robert Stone, who had recently passed away. Michael didn't know why, but when he reached out to lightly touch the tombstone, a strange feeling rose in his heart. At first, he thought it was just fatigue or the coldness of the stone, but then, everything changed. A blurry scene appeared before his eyes. A vivid image of a man named Robert Stone, but not in a moment of peace, but in the last moment of his life. Michael saw the image of Robert, a middle-aged man, rushing into an old house, his eyes panicked. Suddenly, the door was slammed open, and for a brief moment, Robert fell to the ground, clutching his chest, seemingly in excruciating pain. His last moments passed in despair and panic, before the screen went black. Michael jerked back, his heart pounding. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had seen the last moments of a dead man, and it was inexplicable. For the next week, Michael could not stop touching the tombstones. Every time he touched a grave, an image, a final moment appeared before his eyes. A man who had fallen down the stairs, an old woman who had died in her sleep, a child crying in terror before stopping to breathe. Each story, each final moment of the dead, all appeared clearly in his mind, making it impossible for him to escape. One night, while working late, Michael felt a strong pull from an old grave at the end of the cemetery. He stepped closer, and when his hand touched the gravestone, a terrible scene appeared. A woman, her face hidden in darkness, stood in an empty room. She turned, and her empty, lightless eyes stared straight at him. She approached, step by step, her feet not touching the ground, as if she were no longer a part of this world. A cold feeling enveloped Michael's body, but he couldn't stop. He was caught up in the image, unable to escape. Suddenly, the woman opened her mouth, and a hoarse voice echoed in his head. "Now it's your turn." In that moment, Michael felt the eerie presence of the dead, and he understood that he was no longer just a caretaker of the cemetery. He had become part of the dark secrets of this place, where each grave was a door to the final moments of the dead. He tried to pull his hand back, but couldn't. The feeling was so strong that it was as if an invisible force was pulling him into another world, where every soul existed forever, waiting to tell its story. Can Michael escape this curse and restore peace to the cemetery, or will he forever be trapped in the last moments of the unknown souls? The secrets of the cemetery are yet to be revealed. Do you dare to touch that tombstone and face the final moments? Share this story and discover the secrets that have not been revealed.